Always Mine by SamadiW. Summary.
You've been avoiding me, Granger. I've missed you,
Draco told her, his voice hardly audible. Hermione swallowed as his hand went around her waist, and he brushed his lips along her skin. Letting out a low moan, she whispered, "People don't miss their mistakes, Draco." The grip around her waist tightened. He placed a soft kiss on the throbbing pulse of her neck. A Dramione Fanfiction. Chapter 1. Malfoy Manor. It felt like a dream. A soft knocking. Was he dreaming? Was it a fantasy he suppressed, or the cheap wine from the night before coming back to haunt him? The thick green curtains were drawn, the room completely dark. Again the bloody annoying sound, this time more prominent. He willed himself awake, his eyes adjusting to the darkness. Someone was at the door. He rubbed his eyes and thought, who would fucking dare wake him up at this ungodly hour? The knocking was persistent and getting on his last freaking nerve. Fuck! He cursed and groaned into the soft pillow. He grudgingly raised himself and sat on the edge of his bed. Running his long fingers through his platinum blonde locks, he glanced lazily at the woman sleeping next to him. He could make out her shape. The silk sheets hugged her body. She was completely naked underneath. A smirk curved his lips. He thought in amusement. She was older, but he was better. For half of the night she had cried out his name in pleasure, digging her long fingernails into his back and dragging them painfully across his muscles. The woman had talents worse than his fucking owl. The constant knocking continued. Fuck! He uttered a silent curse and grabbed his black robe. He opened the door to find his house elf standing outside rather nervously, cowering in his presence. He narrowed his eyes and glared at the small, terrified figure. You better have a bloody good reason for waking me up. The elf whimpered and quickly presented a silver tray to appease her master. Curiosity got the better of him, and his eyes ran over the rich Hogwarts crest. He snatched the letter promptly from the house elf and shut the door. The woman had woken up. He threw a bored look and stared at the letter in his hand. They had met at a party and ended up in bed. It was nothing out of the ordinary. It hadn't taken him long to smooth-talk her into sleeping with him. She was more than compliant. Despite his colorful past, he was still a Malfoy after all. The woman was beautiful, no doubt there. He had a type, but she was just a mere distraction for the lack of better things to do. With a gentle flick of his wrist and the room filled with light. Glancing over the letter, he hit back a sarcastic laugh. No fucking way. The whole idea seemed unbelievable, but there would be plenty of time to ponder it. The woman made her presence known. Come back to bed, darling, she drawled seductively. She pushed a rich silk sheet off her, revealing her eager and willing body. She played with her breasts and tweaked the nipples, bringing them to life. Giving the letter one last look, he carefully dropped it onto the dresser. Grinning smugly, he walked over to the woman, removed his robes, and joined the willing brunette that shared his bed. The letter read, Draco Malfoy, head boy. The woman moaned as he crushed her lips with his and slipped his tongue inside. Draco. Hermione Granger's home. Darling, you've got a letter from the school. Hermione eagerly turned towards her mother's voice from downstairs. She loved the sound of her mother's bubbly voice. It was warm and calming. Coming close to losing it for good made her cherish every second with her beloved parents. Coming, Mum, Hermione said loud enough for her mother to hear. She hurried down the stairs, went straight to the kitchen, and secretly hoped it was what she had been waiting for all summers. Fingers and toes crossed for good luck, she raised her head and took in the large brown owl. One of the Hogwarts barn owls lazily cleaned itself on the windowsill. Hermione went over without hesitation and stroked the brown feathers. The owl gave a hoot of contentment before stretching out its leg for her to remove the letter. It took off immediately once it was free of its package, and Hermione frowned. Holding the letter tenderly, she reverently ran her fingers across the embossed Hogwarts crest. Her hands trembled, but carefully she opened it, pulled out the letter, and read the contents. A huge smile broke across her face. She squeaked in delight and hugged the letter to her chest. The parents poked their heads around the corner and entered the kitchen space, their faces curious at their daughter's little dance around the pantry. Hermione handed over the letter and beamed at them. "Oh, sweetheart, congratulations!" Julia Granger warmly hugged her daughter tightly. It wasn't a surprise. Their daughter was the brightest girl in their class and a moral student. Richard Granger puffed his chest proudly and exclaimed, "Head girl, it's a big responsibility, and you truly deserve it." He grabbed his daughter in a big hug and spun around madly while she screamed, "Put me down!" She squealed and broke out with a big smile. "I know, Dad. I'm just so excited." Hermione had been doing the same thing for 7 years, but this year was vastly different. She felt exhilarated excitement as she stepped onto the gleaming red Hogwarts Express. She bumped into a few students. They caught sight of the hidden golden badge and backed away from her quickly. She entered the compartment and found Ginny, Harry, Ron, and Neville. Neville had his nose buried in the quibbler. Luna sat beside him, deep in thought, absent-mindedly playing with her hair. Luna looked up as Hermione entered. "Congratulations on becoming head girl," she said in her usual whimsical way. Hermione sat down next to her, perplexed. "How did you know?" Luna gave a nonchalant shrug, pointed to her badge's visible bit, and returned to whatever she was thinking before. Everyone stared at her in awe. Luna always gave them cause for wonderment. Everyone knew she was quirky, but how was she right every time? It was bloody eerie. Ron plopped himself down next to Hermione and sent her book flying. Without hesitation, he cupped her face and kissed her long and hard. Hermione protested at first, but Ron held on tight. An amused voice made them jump apart. "Oi, get a bloody room, weasel shit. Nobody wants to see your tongue wrestling with a Granger." Draco had the door open. He openly sneered and stood outside the compartment with Theo and Blaise. The 2 Southern boys laughed at the comment. Luna greeted them warmly. "Theo, Blaise, have a good holiday?" They eyed the mystic blonde suspiciously, but Theo happily replied, "It was good, thanks." He almost fell over himself. How was yours?" Draco stared at his friends in disgust. "What the hell are you doing, you bloody git?" Theo shrugged his shoulders. "What?" Hermione let her eyes wander over the arrogant, pretty Slytherin. Malfoy had grown taller. He seemed more fit, but what stood out was his hair. It was different, wild and free. It wasn't the usual neat, plastered down to his head look he sported the previous years. It now spiked up haphazardly. A few strands fell across his pale forehead. It suited him well, she grudgingly thought, and frowned. Really, Hermione? Ew, this was Malfoy. After all, her inner monologue screamed. Draco caught her looking and asked suggestively, "See something you like, Granger?" A dangerous shadow clouded his cool grey eyes. Keeping his eyes fixed on Hermione, he licked his bottom lip and rasped, "Weasel, you better satisfy her proper mate, or—" His gaze dropped to her lips.
I would be happy to do it for you.
Hermione felt herself blush. Purposely she looked away and stared out of the window. For a split second, she pictured Draco's lips on hers. They looked soft, and a second was enough. What the fuck did she just do? What the hell was wrong with her? Ron and Harry were quickly on their feet, their wands raised and pointed directly at Draco's chest. The blonde Slytherin didn't react in his usual manner. He just looked at the two Gryffindors lazily, even faking a yawn. They heard another whoosh as Theo and Blaise took out their wands and pointed them threateningly at Ron and Harry, but before Hermione could intervene, Draco stepped into their compartment and moved Ron's wand away from his chest.
Calm down, gentlemen,
he calmly informed his friends with a hint of a smug smile. They exchanged a look of uncertainty and lowered their wands reluctantly. Harry still stood his ground. Draco cocked his head to the side and leered.
I am sure you would not want to start the year by cursing the head boy, Potter.
The Gryffindors went silent, processing the bit of shocking news. This maniac had to be lying. It was completely insane to make him head boy. After all the shite had pulled last year. No bloody way. Harry lowered his wand slowly. Ginny let out a snarky laugh.
Even their bright fucking mind would make you head boy.
Draco shrugged.
Fuck if I know, Weaslett, but you better watch yourself.
He added menacingly and walked away, leaving them all to stare after him. Theo threw Luna a smile and an apologetic look before he hurriedly followed his friends. Draco is quite handsome. Luna's comment cut through the tension like a knife through soft butter. They all stared at her again. Harry saw Ginny nod in agreement and nudged her in annoyance. Ginny threw her hands in the air.
What? I might hate this time of year, but he is a hottie and looks better this year too. Don't you agree, Hermione?
Ron listened intently, and Hermione swallowed hard but managed to reply. I didn't really notice.
Merlin, she had noticed. Maybe a bit too much, to be honest. Was he always that bloody fit?
Ginny rolled her eyes.
You might as well be a nun.
Hermione's cheeks turned red. Ron wrapped his arms around her and hissed,
Don't listen to her, darling.
He stuck his tongue out at his sister for good measure. They were close to Hogwarts, and Hermione yawned. Letting go of Ron's hand, she stretched and stood up. I've got to go to the head's compartment, she informed her friends with next to no enthusiasm. The fact that Malfoy was head boy seemed to be affecting her, and not in a good way. Hermione sighed and thought might as well get it over with. She had to face the annoying Slytherin kid at some point. Not like avoiding the fucking prat was an option. Ron squeezed her hand reassuringly.
If that lunatic gets you any trouble, let us know.
It was a sweet gesture that Ron wanted to be her knight in shining armor, but Draco was no fool. He was second only to her in grades and an extremely talented wizard. He supposed, however, grudgingly, that Draco was the best choice for head boy besides Harry. After the disturbing events surrounding Malfoy and Voldemort, Hermione had to admit her shock at the headmistress's decision to make him head boy. Anyways, what the hell did she know? It wasn't her place to wonder. He would deal with it maturely and responsibly if he gave her trouble. Hermione turned to Ginny. I'll see you later at the prefects' meeting. Ginny nodded and gave her a "you can do this" smile. The head's compartment was straight ahead, unconsciously fixing her shirt. She stood outside and let out a frustrated groan. She went to snide at the door open, but stopped dead in her tracks. Listened intently to the alarming noises from within. But was that a pleasured moan? Hermione's face twisted in confusion as she slowly slid the door open, and a voice of pure steel bellowed,
What the bloody hell are you doing, Granger?
Bollocks. She stared, frozen, to the spot as Astoria Greengrass sat across a very aroused Malfoy. Hermione grimaced in disgust and almost gagged. Despite her interruption, it didn't seem to deter the duo. Astoria continued to kiss Draco passionately while his hands roamed under her school shirt. The head girl in her surged forwards, and she asserted herself. Ever so politely, she coughed purposely and said, "Ahem! Malfoy, this isn't a cheap hotel room, and if you and Astoria wish to continue, I think it would be best you find somewhere else." She boldly stepped into the compartment and refused to budge. She defiantly ignored the death stare Malfoy gave her. "Stupid, uptight cunt," he thought angrily. Draco smirked at the fiery Gryffindor and tapped Astoria on her exposed arse. The Slytherin girl glared at Hermione, obviously displeased at being interrupted. She gently rose and got off the ice-blonde man. Astoria adjusted her blouse and spat. "Don't you have somewhere to be, Granger?" She continued venomously. "Just because you're an uptight virgin doesn't mean we all have to be." Hermione felt her cheeks redden for the third time in just 3 hours. The Slytherin girl's comment was true, but uncalled for and unnecessary. She opened her mouth to retaliate, but Malfoy said with an amused expression, "As much as I hate to admit it, the head girl has a valid point." He grew bored, waved his hand, and dismissed Astoria. The Slytherin girl threw Hermione a look of pure hatred before departing. Hermione sighed. What a wonderful start. Shaking her head, she picked up her bag to stow overhead. The small hairs on her neck stood up to a foreign presence behind her. What the hell was we doing? She stiffened as his hot breath ghosted over her skin, on her neck. He whispered into the shell of her ear. "You smell divine, faintly of roses and lavender." Hermione shuddered. He was right on the money. Clumsily, she sidestepped the head boy and went to sit in the corner, far away from him. Hermione knew what Draco was trying to do, but she wouldn't give him the pleasure. She grinned. "Two can play this game, Draco Malfoy." Draco took the seat opposite her and looked at her. He studied her every movement and mannerism. She tapped her fingers on the pages of the book she read, crossed her legs at the ankles, and bit her lip in concentration. Her ridiculous hair was less wild and tamer, her eyes were a pleasing shade of golden brown, and she smelled good. Her reaction to his closeness had been enjoyable. Getting under his skin to rattle the Gryffindor saint would be easy. He broke the silence. "Never thought you would stoop so low to date that loser. Even you can do better than him." "Take the bait, Hermione, come on," Draco thought excitedly. Hermione ignored him purposely. She would be the bigger person. She felt him lean in. "Merlin, what now?" Hermione thought and moved back as far as possible. His face was inches away from hers. She could see the swirl of unrest in his pupils. "Are you really a virgin, Granger? Is Weasley that bad?" "Keep calm, Hermione," she silently advised herself. "Keep quiet, be the better person." But her temper got the better of her, and she snapped. The absolute rotten excuse of a man, but she refused to satisfy him. She spoke with mock sweetness. "Malfoy, I don't know how you possibly made head boy." Fixing him with a look, she added angrily, "But my sex life is none of your concerns." Draco laughed. "Lack of sex life, you mean?" Laughing, he settled back into the seat and stared out of the window. The picturesque view was pleasing. They sat in silence until the train came to a halt. Hermione kept aside her book and went to retrieve her bag. The train gave a sudden jerk, causing her to lose her balance and fall backwards with the heavy bag in hand. Draco caught her easily, held her against his firm chest, and teased.
You all right there, Granger? You look a little flustered.
Why did he have to smell so good? The ferret smelled incredible. Hermione quickly tore herself from his grasp and marched out without a backward glance. Hiding a smirk, Draco followed the uptight Gryffindor. This year might be bloody eventful, after all. Theo and Blaise studied Draco as he watched Granger put her hand through Wizette's. They chattered in their girlish way up to the ancient stone staircase leading to the Great Hall.
What are you playing at, mate?
Blaise asked curiously, but amused. Draco looked at his oldest friend and replied innocently,
I have no idea what you're talking about.
Theo joined in and moved his hand across the ear.
Bullshit. You've got that look in your eyes. I can practically see the fun times.
Draco looked at the hole ahead and took a deep breath. He hesitated before going in. Students moved around him. Few threw him looks of suspicion. Granger looked at him briefly while she instructed first years to form a line. He hadn't expected to come back. Hell, he hadn't expected to be welcomed back, and that too as head boy. Blaise touched his shoulder.
Look to the future, mate. Let the fucking past die. We got your back.
Theo pretended to cry.
I'm so overcome with emotions. I just want to hug you, Draco.
Draco ducked out of his friend's hug.
Touch me, and you will die, not.
He took a deep breath, ran his fingers through his hair, and entered the Great Hall. This year would be better. He would make a difference. To be continued. Welcome to this new Dramione. I'm super excited to share it with you. I was in a bit of a Dramione slump over the last couple of weeks. I'm still leaning a bit more towards Drarry, but this one has a really, really good plot. And I'm super excited to read it to you. What do you think will happen next in this story? You can let me know in the comments. Thank you for listening as always, and if you would like to stay up to date on upcoming chapters and stories, you can follow me on YouTube, Spotify, or AO3.